Hi, welcome to This Week in Ames. I'm Susan Guiazza. On today's show, we check in with the new Planning and Housing Director, Kelly Diekman. Hi, my guest today is Kelly Diekman with the Planning and Housing Department. Kelly, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So you're a relatively new department director for the city of Ames. Tell me a little bit about your background and how you came to Ames.
I grew up in South Dakota. I went to high school there and graduated from South Dakota State University. And from there I decided I wanted to go to the West Coast and look at some planning opportunities out there. And I spent a few years in Oregon, and I spent the majority of my years in California. And recently my family and I looked at some other opportunities and thought we'd like to head back to the Midwest, and Ames looked like a great opportunity for us with being a college town and a thriving community and lots of interest for us.
Now, this isn't your only exposure to Ames. You kind of have a funny connection back to the university.
Yeah, I actually did come to Iowa State for 1 year, but not as a planning undergraduate. I was actually a chemistry major for a year before I decided to take time off from school and reevaluate what else I could do with look at what other professional options we had, and then I went back to South Dakota State.
So planning is a kind of a broad field. It has a lot of different directions to go. What attracts you to the field of planning, and what value do you see it for citizens?
I'm really attracted to planning and looking to where we see community investments and community benefits out of the development process and the planning process, in terms of what is a community going to gain by when it redevelops a property, develops a new part of property. There's lots of needs in a community. Development can satisfy some of those, whether it's new housing opportunities, whether it's new shopping opportunities, or it's reinvesting in current buildings or property just for its upkeep or maintenance and improvement to everybody that's going to be going by or wanting to experience in a neighborhood in a city. So those are some of the things I think that planning really helps promote in a community. Other things that we can do in planning is look at just the details of development and architectural elements, look at preservation of natural resources, integrating different features of a project for planning for infrastructure improvements in the city, and how we can do better transportation planning, better bicycle planning. All aspects of what we experience on a day-to-day basis can be integrated into the planning process. And Ames looks at all of those things at different levels and at different times with their high-level land use policy plans and transportation plans back down into the review of individual project permits.
So you mentioned a lot about developing. Planning is also about not developing. Isn't that correct, when you look comprehensively at how a city's going to grow?
So that's a key part of the planning, is trying to stress where your priorities are in a community. It doesn't mean that everything changes. You identify all of your priorities, whether it's conservation or growth, or whether there's different areas that you think would be better to change or to develop. And in Ames, we have a policy of trying to look at where the smart growth of the city can be strategically, to look for whether there should be future annexations, whether there's more reinvestment inward in the community, which is called infill development. And Ames tries to balance both of those perspectives, and we look at where conservation is more important than development, and where the opportunities are for development at the same time to meet those ongoing community needs where we're a growing and thriving community.
I would think that Ames is a bit unique in that we have this huge university presence right in the middle of the city. How does that affect the development of a community when you're dealing with part of your inner core sort of being off limits?
It is one of those challenges that when you have another government agency, an entity, it's very similar if you have a lot of federal property in your city or a lot of state property in your city where they run their operations. ISU gets to run their operations and use their land to meet their needs. So it does provide some challenges. Now we have a relationship of trying to coordinate the needs of ISU with objectives that we have as a city. So that's helpful. We have some common goals of looking for reinvestment around Campustown and the campus to support those interests there. But we do have to do a lot of coordination. Some things are just not able to be done because ISU has a long history of using their property for ag research or for some things that are very beneficial to the college and to the community overall. And we have to look at other options for doing things, other alternatives in different parts of town or for different ways of doing things sometimes.
And I guess it's not just the presence in the inner core. As you mentioned, there's a lot of ag research going on. So as the community grows, we sort of kind of go around some of those university-owned lands.
Yeah, at times it does create an odd shape. You end up with Ames, as you said, the core has always been ISU's campus in the middle, and we have the west and the east to that. But as we grow north and south, there are also those same properties, there are different properties outside of the city now that we start to have to grow around as well, and take into account the needs of Iowa State and how they do their operations.
So Ames has grown kind of uniquely, I think, as a surprise to some people who were here maybe 20, 30, 40 years ago. That gap between Ames and Gilbert was much more pronounced, and now it seems to be closing.
Yeah, the city does have what's called the Ames Urban Fringe Plan, and that's a cooperative agreement between Story County and Gilbert and Ames to cooperatively look at growth issues between the county and Gilbert and Ames. And really there is an agreement that the city won't get within a mile of Gilbert, and Gilbert wouldn't vice versa come further south as well. So there will always be a gap as this cooperative agreement exists between the city. There would be other potential build out of some of the areas that have started to develop, but there isn't this sense of continued movement towards Gilbert because of this agreement. And this has been in place for a few years now, where we try to have cooperative planning in the county to meet both Gilbert and Ames and Story County's needs.
And as we were mentioning before, there has been residential growth north, which probably wasn't the incentivized part of the community to grow in, but that is happening. And we have development south in industrial lands and commercial. What are some other projects that are on the horizon?
Yeah, it's interesting. Ames has spent a lot of effort in the last 10 years to identify kind of a hierarchy of growth areas, and each one has their own benefits, whether it's the southwest or whether it was the northwest, or now we're looking at the north. And part of it comes down to opportunity, part of it comes down to desire. With the growth of the college, there's an interest in a lot of single-family development to the north, which is really a strong market for a lot of different housing types for that. And then in the south, you actually have a good residential market as well, which is kind of looking a little bit differently than just maybe a college employment core, because you have great Highway 30 access, and then you have the business park expanding and growing. So there's really a strong demand for housing down there too. It's kind of a little bit different niche of the market than maybe what Ames has even seen traditionally. The biggest factor in the south is that Iowa State Research Park is looking to expand. And that's rapidly coming up to us. We're looking at working with them in the expansion to double the size, to add about 200 acres of land for new opportunities out there. The state of Iowa has recognized this as a very important project for economic development to not just Ames and Story County, but really to the state. So there's a lot of investment that's going to go on out there, and the city wants to be prepared to respond not just from a jobs base, but also look at what the housing needs are and what we have for opportunities for all types of housing, whether it's in the south or the north. There's really a need in a lot of different parts of the city for different reasons.
That whole development in the south with the web filings expansion, very exciting, really positive information or expansion for the community. Also, Campustown, there's some redevelopment opportunities there as well.
Right, so the city has a very strong interest in the reinvestment in Campustown. It's been an ongoing priority to the city, and the city had a strong study done about 5 or 6 years ago where they looked at how we could incentivize the market to come in and look at reinvestment in Campustown, which was thought to be through mixed-use development for the most part, where you keep a commercial core and maybe allow for apartment dwellings or condominium dwellings to be added in. And we're actually seeing that now in the market where with the student housing needs and just the strong need for housing overall, we are seeing a number of projects that are likely to come in over the next year. It'll really kind of reshape the front of Campustown, where you think of Lincoln Way as that front door into Campustown.
Right, campuses, or the ISU is often, although Campustown is private, they really look at that as an entryway, an entry point into the campus, and beautification has always been a goal.
Yeah, it'll be very complementary to the campus in the sense that you're going to end up with a much more contemporary building frontage with new development occurring there. Some of these standalone parking lot based buildings will be changed over into a more urban design oriented multi-use building, which may have parking behind the building with buildings up at the front. You have a chance for some street activity and sidewalk activity, more pedestrian friendly features. And that's really the benefit that's coming from that kind of investment is, yeah, you're getting a housing benefit, but you're also making a public space that a lot of people would like to see improved and give them some more opportunities to do different things in the city. And one of those opportunities is going to be along Lincoln Way as these projects redevelop.
So is the Campustown redevelopment considered sort of a multi-generational kind of project? I know right now Campustown is looked at as more of an asset for students. 25 years ago, I think there was more of a mixed crowd accessing those businesses. How do you see that playing out in the future?
Well, I think there's a lot of commercial opportunity there, and really what you're most likely to see is the student housing demand will drive the housing side of it, especially in the near term. As the enrollment increases in ISU, you're going to see a strong need for that. I think the commercial opportunities is where you're going to see the ability to meet multiple needs throughout the community. When you have these new retail spaces created, it's different than the smaller spaces that have been there in the past. So you'll have a mix of the more local establishments and local cafes and restaurants, but you also might start to introduce other kind of more traditional retail elements back into Campustown. So you might have more of a need from across town to come there and want to experience a more of an urban environment. It'll still be different than downtown. It would never be able to be what downtown is in terms of how its commercial base is, but it would start to look at the opportunities to bring other people into that area just as more of an experience as well.
Now I know a common complaint, whether real or imagined, has been a parking situation in the Campustown area. Now when the intermodal facility opened just a few years ago, additional parking then was added. Do you see that playing into this development picture?
I think the intermodal facility is a great outlet for having that extra parking. It's been fully operational for a short time and it hasn't even been fully utilized to its capacity yet. So we think there is the great capacity there. It's going to be conveniently, it's about 1 block away from Welch, where if you just come into Campustown, you can go and find a place to park very easily and then walk that extra block into wherever you're trying to go, rather than try to find the street spaces or even the municipal lots in different places, which they're still there. And if you're a frequent user, you might know that's where you want to go. But the big resource of that parking structure is to allow for people to come into Campustown, get out of their car, experience Campustown the way it's meant to be, which is on a pedestrian scale, not just a drive-in kind of commercial shopping center experience. It's really what we're trying to get is people out of their cars and to walk through the area.
So you mentioned briefly downtown, and I just have to say that the Downtown Facade Grant Improvement Project has made a tremendous difference in downtown. Can you talk a little bit about that project and the sort of the motivation behind that?
Right, so City Council has, for a number of years, had a program where they leverage just a matching amount of money, up to $15,000 to a business to do exterior facade improvements, not just maintenance, but to actually do facade improvements that bring character back to a building if that's been removed. And you have a couple of options. You can do historically consistent designs, or you can implement other more retail or commercial oriented features. And it's been a very successful program for us. We've been approving on average anywhere from 3 or 4 or 5 building facades a year. We just authorized another 3 this past fall, so you'll start to see some more work downtown. I think every year you see a couple of different buildings getting their facades improved.
Sure, you'll see the barricades on the
see the little
sidewalks,
barricades,
and then in a couple of months you'll see
some windows will change, and some materials might change, and then awnings might come back into it depending on what they're doing. We think it's been a very successful program. The amount of investment we've seen in downtown far outpaces what we give as the matching grant to people to do that. It's just enough to kick off interest, and I think when people start to see that there's a program and an interest by the city, they start to look into it and they start to see what the benefits are to them. And it's not so much about the city subsidy, it's about the support and the policy of the city to support that, and people want to see that investment. And downtown's doing very well. It's full. There's not a lot of vacant spaces. It's something that's really working to keep us with a lively downtown.
Another part of your department is the neighborhood liaison position. Again, did that outreach to neighborhood associations, keeping the lines of communication open. That's been really a popular position in the past years. We've seen growth in the neighborhood newsletter, the quarterly publication that goes out to active neighborhood associations, and we've seen growth in the number of neighborhood associations. Mm-hmm. So how do you feel about just the involvement of the residents in those? Right,
so kind of just outside of just planning for projects, we do have an interest in neighborhood planning. Council's very into supporting existing neighborhoods. So Council has supported the planning department through staffing a position to work with neighborhoods just on neighborhood issues. It doesn't have to be about a development project. It could just be about issues in a neighborhood. What can we do to even build continuity with our neighbors. It doesn't have to even be physical improvements, but we have staff available to help with neighborhood meetings. There's a block party trailer that we have in the summer months to let people try and organize a little social gathering to try and get people to come together. And we're also there if neighborhood does have a meeting and they want to have questions about maybe something that's changing in their neighborhood, whether it's a city project or whether it's a development project, we're able to come to your meeting and talk to you about that. What are the implications? How can things work for you? And other times we've also done plans for an area. If there's a strong interest in certain parts of the neighborhood, we have done neighborhood plans before to try and look at whether public infrastructure could be changed or improved, whether there's different ways of integrating development as things have maybe redeveloped or infilled over time. So there's a broad aspect to the neighborhood planning, from just working on social interaction to also working on physical layout of neighborhoods.
Well, and the other part of your department is planning and housing. Just briefly, explain the housing component.
Right, so Ames has a housing division. Most of our funding at this point in time comes from federal grants through what's called the Community Development Block Grant, provided by HUD from the federal government. And those funds are really used to provide for infrastructure improvements to support housing needs of neighborhoods. We spend time doing infrastructure and utility improvements to support existing neighborhoods. It does have a requirement to work into low-income areas, so there are restrictions on where we spend the money. It does have to have benefit to low-income areas. And it can subsidize certain elements of housing projects. It mostly works on how do you provide for safe and affordable housing in your community, and you have a lot of choices on that. We do a 5-year plan. We're just going to be starting an update to that consolidated plan here later this year, which will be setting out what the policy is for the city for another 5 years on different programs. And we use that for neighborhood reinvestment. We can do cleanup and maintenance of buildings. We can do acquisition of foreclosures. We can help with individual property owners that may need assistance with rehabilitation of their house if they're qualifying. So there's not just big projects that the city might take on of repaving a street, but there's also smaller elements to that to just try and help stabilize neighborhoods and help them have that reinvestment again in existing neighborhoods.
Well, I know you've only been here a few months, but it sounds like you're really involved in a lot of different projects. Any first impressions?
My first impression is that Ames is very busy. There's a lot of activity here. There's a lot of interest going on, a lot of competing interests, and a lot of different elements of what makes planning exciting for me. It's one of the reasons I wanted to come here is I thought Ames had a lot going on, and that's really been proven out in the first 2 months between the commercial development and the employment development and also all the housing interests that are going on. And within that, there's a lot of interest at every level, whether it's a neighborhood interest or a conservation interest or an economic development interest. So you really get to bring everything together at Ames, which is really satisfying professionally to me, and being able to meet a lot of interest from different interest groups out there.
Well, I appreciate you stopping by and
Sure.
sharing all this with the viewers.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, as we get into the month of October, remember Yard Waste Free Days is coming up. The first Yard Waste Free Day will be held from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. on Saturday, October 19th. There's several more dates that are happening in November, so be sure to check the website for more information. Also, if you have young trick-or-treaters in your house and want to know when trick-or-treating day is in Ames, it is from 5:30 to 7:30 on Thursday, October 31st. Well, that's our show for today. Thanks for watching, and tune in next week for This Week in Ames.